In Bermuda grass pastures that have not been aggressively fertilized with nitrogen and potassium too, is the invasion of centipede grass, which, as you can imagine, that's pretty detrimental to your yield, considering centipede was designed for turf type and to be mowed frequently and to stay pretty low to the ground, right? So what are our other options then? Bahia grass is going to be our other warm season perennial option. Bahia grass typically is not going to yield what you'll get out of a Bermuda grass, but it's much less nitrogen expensive, not nearly as dependent on nitrogen to get good production out of it. So that's a big management consideration there. Another thing we've seen is that Bahia grass can survive wet feet really well. Any of you guys experienced Hurricane Matthew a couple years ago? Yeah, I was right in the thick of it. I had gone home that weekend, I don't know why, so I'd gone pretty far east, and then we got 16 inches of rain in 10 hours. So it was pretty stellar. We had Bahia grass stands that stayed underwater for a week, and they came out of it very well. So if you're working in areas that are a little swampy, DJ, something that floods a good bit, Bahia grass might be a good option for you. One critical distinction between Bermuda grass and Bahia grass, again, my favorite thing about Bermuda grass is that it goes dormant in the fall. And I'm talking about completely dormant. Y'all know this very well, right? So it gives us the opportunity to overseed that acreage with a cool season annual, like cereal rye, ryegrass, triticale. Bahia grass, it does not overseed very well consistently. And you can kind of tell that too, right? If you go out and look in your Bahia grass pastures, you can still find a lot of green even this time of year, even after all the snow and cold we have. Bermuda grass is gone. Any questions about our warm season perennials? Yes, sir. So the question was, can you put a legume in the Bermuda grass? So never say never, never say always. You can get a perennial clover like white clover or red clover to survive in Bermuda grass, but they are competitive with each other. So thinking about the growth habit of Bermuda, you know, it runs along the ground and is very aggressive, and white clover is also going to run along that similar habit. So you'll find that you'll have spots of clover and spots of Bermuda, but they don't coexist well together. It's also been shown to be very, very expensive and probably not giving you the return on your investment that you're looking for. One thought I've had, and I'd appreciate Dr. Andre's input, would be red clover in Bermuda grass. Have you had better luck with that?
Yeah, I've had luck with both. Actually.
Have you?
White and red.
Mm-hmm.
I think the grazing and the red keeps well in the summer. Like you really
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And another important thing is to use those pretty aggressive white clover.
Mm-hmm. So like an intermediate type, like renovation. Yeah, something that's got more stolen density to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's really, I've seen that work well in grazing.
Mm-hmm.
Not in hay. Not in hay. On a hay situation, that's alfalfa.
Yeah, and Dr. Andre is going to talk to us in just a little bit about interseeding alfalfa into Bermuda grass. So you're talking about for hay or for pasture? Pasture. Okay. Now, one thing I am in huge support of is in your winter overseed utilizing crimson clover. Because actually the way that we get the nitrogen from the clovers into our system is one of two ways. Either the plants die, and then when their tissue degrades we get the nitrogen, or whenever it gets grazed and it passes back through our animals. So I really like grazing crimson clover into Bermuda grass because that nitrogen is there at green up. Great question. All right. So now we get to move into my absolute favorite part, which is talking about winter annuals. How many of you guys have some winter annuals planted right now? Okay, what have we got?
Black oats and wheat.
Black oats and wheat. Marshall ryegrass. Italian ryegrass. Marshall ryegrass. What else? we have anything fancy? Does anyone do anything with brassicas or clovers?
I've got crimson clover and ryegrass.
Crimson clover in with the ryegrass?
Yeah, so the wheat and the oats also had rape, radish, turnip, peas, and crimson.
All right, so we got a little crazy mix going on up here. Awesome. So the reason I love winter annual grasses so much is because their growth curve is so different than cool season perennial grasses. It's typically a lot faster and a lot earlier than what you'll see out of your cool season perennials. And depending on what you plant, it can fill in gaps in the fall, late winter, and early spring, depending on the species. Winter annual grasses, as a general category, are going to have the highest quality of nutrition across the board. Okay? And Dr. Rayburn already alluded to that about ryegrass not having enough effective fiber in it. Again, with Bermuda grass being the exception here, planting into existing sod is not consistent. So I know I'll get a lot of calls, hey, I've got this fescue stand and it's not my best stand and I want to really get more productivity out of it, so I'd like to drill a winter annual into it. Sometimes it works, a lot of times it doesn't. So I'm not a huge fan of drilling winter annual grasses into our cool season perennial grasses. Thinking about competition, that existing plant is a lot better suited to take up water and to take up nutrients and intercept light than those cool season annual seedlings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but if the cool season does take hold, it can get rid of the fescue out there.
Yeah, that's true. So, you know, they call it pasture cropping, right? So trying to get an annual crop to grow in a perennial. And that's the thing, back to competition. If we get a really good stand of our winter annual, you're not going to have a good stand of that cool season perennial anymore. Great point. So again, I really am in full support of setting aside some acreage for annuals, and we've talked about that already. And you can argue what percentage of your farm should be in annuals, but realistically it's about what works for you and your farm and the goals of your operation. So let's talk about this timing management a little bit. And you guys will be able to relate to this very well because most of you have got ryegrass on your farm. So staging growth with winter annuals is so easy. That's what makes winter annuals so much fun for me. And you can mix them to get the full benefit of having fall, winter, and then spring growth, okay? So if we take a look at what we can get in the fall, so especially those of you that are in your warm season perennial areas, one of your biggest challenges is that awkward time period between when your Bermuda went dormant and when your ryegrass comes on strong, right? So spring oats have been fitting into this picture very, very well. Spring oats are going to give you forage in about 45 to 55 days as long as we get rain. So I know, Todd, you planted some spring oats this fall as part of the double play mix. When did you end up getting grazing out of it?
I would say probably 30, 45 days, probably 40 days after I planted it.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think the color kind of knocked it. And after that grazing, I got some good grazing.
Good, excellent. Yeah, and he brings up such a good point, which is that spring oats typically do not survive the winter. Once we hit those days where we stay in the teens, which seems like we've had too many of those this winter, but they will get bit back by the cold and they're going to be done. So you've got to utilize this fall grazing while you have it. So the next kind of piece of that puzzle is, well, what do I do more so in the winter? And nothing's growing when it's 12 degrees outside, but when we get these nice 45, 50 degree days, a couple of our really winter hardy winter annuals are going to do a great job at capitalizing on that and growing through. Cereal rye and triticale are two that stand out to me. Cereal rye, to be honest, is not my favorite grazing crop. I don't think it's really that productive until it puts out that rank seed head, and then we're losing a lot of good quality out of it. I definitely prefer triticale. Which again is that cross between cereal rye and wheat. It's very leafy, it's got a lot of good tillers to it, and it's going to give me that late winter grazing. So if we're thinking about early spring then, kind of before ryegrass, but not as early as what you'd get out of your rye or triticale, a winter oat is a good option here. So a winter oat does differ from a spring oat. Winter oats are going to be more winter hardy. They do not give us that fast fall grazing, but they're going to give us this early spring grazing. I get very excited about oats. If you've never seen them before, the leaf on them can get like 1.5 inches wide. It is awesome. It is so cool. And you guys are very familiar with the growth habit of annual ryegrass, right? When do we get that big flush of growth out of our annual ryegrass?
About the time Bermuda grass is trying to green up.
There you go, about the time Bermuda is trying to green up. Yeah, so typically it's going to be like in early to mid-April, and then it's going to try to keep going all the way through May. So, you know, if we overseed all of our Bermuda grass with annual ryegrass, we're really missing a big boat here, because we could have had fall, winter, and early spring grazing. And I put spring oats here again because this time of year, between mid-February and mid-March, you can plant a spring oat. So a lot of winter injury occurred this year to annuals that were late planted. And so a lot of spring oat acreage going in. And again, you can get that grazing off in about 45 or 50 days. So really, really fun stuff there. Any questions about winter annual grasses or staging their growth?
When do you plant the spring?
Great question. So planting date. When are we going to plant these forages? So spring oats, if we're trying to get that fall grazing out of it, we need to be very timely about it. We need to get it in pretty much as soon as our Bermuda grass has gone dormant, which, you know, varies from year to year. Most of the time we say mid-September, but if we're really in a heavy Bermuda grass region, reality of it is we probably don't need to put that in until October 1st. Just because you know, we haven't had a good killing frost yet on our Bermuda. The cereal rye and triticale, you can take them a lot later than most annuals. I'd prefer for you to still get them in somewhere in that mid-September to mid-October time frame, but I'm not going to lie to you, cereal rye goes in like on Christmas Day sometimes, and it can make it through it depending on the winter. Last winter, pretty much everything that got planted made it through. This winter, definitely not the case. Winter oats, again, you're going to want to, really everything in here you're going to want to target between that mid-September to mid-October time frame. Spring oats are a little bit more flexible in that you can get them in mid-February. Anything else? Excellent. All right, I've still got this hoodie, you guys. It was a little chilly in here earlier. Now you want it. All right, so let's talk about our summer annual grasses, okay? So what's the big deal about summer annuals? Why do we care about them? Why do we want them? First of all, it's going to help us increase our summer production. If you're in a cool season forage system, you do experience that pretty big summer slump. If you are in the warm season perennial area, you're going to want something a little bit higher quality, and these summer annuals can answer that higher quality question. One thing, again, can't stress this enough, you do want them to be planted separate from your perennials. Okay, this includes Bermuda grass, this includes fescue. What species you select are going to be based off your goals and farm constraints. And we showed you this picture earlier, but this is just some drone images showing what happens when you do not kill the perennial stand. Too much competition, okay? So with our summer annual grasses, unfortunately, staged grazing is not as effective as like what we see with our winter annuals. A lot of that has to do with rainfall. Rainfall is usually our biggest limitation in the summer. So if you're working on irrigated land, then we can talk about staging you some summer annuals. But otherwise, it's not as effective. So how then do you choose which summer annual you want? It's going to be based on your soil type and what you plan to do with it. So we'll walk through these just one by one. And if you guys have ever planted them before, chime in and let's talk about it. So millets. Any of you guys big millet people? Okay, Reed. Surely somebody besides Reed plants something. All right, so our millets, they're kind of what I refer to as the safety crop. Okay, they can be used for anything, grazing, dry hay, haylage. You can use it as a cover crop, actually. There's no prussic acid risk, so we can take that concern out of our minds. They don't get the sugar cane aphids, but there's always a but if, right? Millets do have typically lower yields than what you'll see out of your Sudan grasses and sorghum Sudans. And up until this point, they were actually a little bit lower in quality, but with identifying the BMR millets, that brown midrib millet, we are able to answer to that quality question. Millets are a very small seed. I've got some in the back if you guys want to see just how small the millet seed is. So more often than not, if I run into issues with millet, it's getting it established. Getting smaller seeds established is typically harder because we've got to get good seed to soil contact, but we can't drill it very deep. 1/2 inch at the deepest with our millets. Questions about millet? Excitement about millet? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So even if the pasture seems really unproductive to you, it's worthwhile to go ahead and get in there and spray it. In inorganic systems, tillage would be the option there. You want this hoodie? He wants it. Yeah. Okay. So then thinking about BMR Sudan grass. So a lot of times we will have Sudan grass get confused with sorghum Sudan, and I apologize for that. In the forage industry, we wanted to make this as confusing as possible. So you have forage sorghum, sorghum Sudan, and Sudan grass. All right, that's some trivia for you, right?
So you walk into the seed dealers, hey, I want some of that S stuff.
Yeah, I want some of that summer annual that gets real tall. So Sudan grass is another very flexible crop. It keeps that smaller stem, so you actually can use it for dry hay, especially if you've got a mower conditioner. Grazing, cover crop haylage, very high yield and high quality, and it does thrive in dry conditions. That's one distinction between the millets and the sorghums that I like to make. Millets tend to do better in wetter areas than your sorghums do. So Sudan grass can really thrive in dry conditions. The difference between Sudan grass and sorghum Sudan, they are related, but the biggest difference there is going to be stalk size and the height that it can get. I've seen sorghum Sudan that was 18 feet tall, and you can only imagine the size of the stalk on it, okay? So it's very difficult to make dry hay out of sorghum Sudan. If you're going to attempt to make dry hay with sorghum Sudan, you've got to take it when it's very small, okay? One that has gotten a lot of interest, and I know we've talked about it so much already, but it's crabgrass. And I know a handful of you guys in here have worked with crabgrass before, so do you want to share? I know you said you did it like 6 years ago.
A few years ago.
Okay, you want to share?
I like it.
You like it, okay.
I don't understand why people spray it, but they do. So if y'all have any that you don't want, just bring it to me.
All right, he's taking orders for crabgrass now. So probably my favorite thing about it is I call it like a low maintenance annual. It does reseed itself, and because of that, all you've got to do to kind of awaken it every spring is either run the cows real heavy across it or pull a drag across it, again, to kind of waken up that seed and get it rolling for the spring. But I really like that aspect of it. It's also gonna stay a lot shorter. So with the millets and the sorghum Sudans and Sudan grasses, they're gonna get very big, and you're gonna have to leave behind at least 6 to 8 inches. So that they can regrow quickly. With your crabgrass, it's more like what you're used to managing with your Bermuda grass or with your fescue. You know, you can take it down to 2.5 inches or so. Other great thing about crabgrass, it is the only annual that I give you full permission to seed into a cool season perennial. Okay. Now my caveat here is that it does need to be a thinning stand of a cool season perennial. So if you've got a stand of fescue that's like 80% or so, that's still too heavy for me. You know, I'm thinking more along the lines of if you've got 50% of a stand of fescue, then I'm comfortable with you putting some crabgrass in it. Crabgrass in the first year seems to be a little bit slow to come on, but in the years after that, it's a little bit quicker to get going. And then of course we have our BMR forage sorghums. These are more typically used for silage. They are single cut, but you could absolutely go through and graze it. It's got a really nice wide big leaf to it. I especially like the dwarf forage sorghums that we've got. Questions about summer annual grasses? Yes, Kenny. Yeah, great point. So Kenny asked, he said, So I guess to make sure that the crabgrass comes back the next year, you have to let it drop seed. Absolutely. And Tim. Oh, good. Hold on. Let me finish my crabgrass rant first, and I'll talk to you about teff. So with the crabgrass, I always joke and tell people that I'll give them $1 if they can keep it from going to seed, because it is a very aggressive seeder. It's always trying to put out that seed head. But if you do not have a pasture rotation, or if you're continuously grazing, then it's not going to have the opportunity to drop that seed, and you will have to plant it every year. Great point. So, oh, okay. Yes, sir.
Crabgrass. I know I planted some. I planted it just with a cyclone seeder on ATV. Is there a better way to plant it?
So his comment was he, in the past, has broadcasted his crabgrass with a cyclone spreader. Is there a better way? I really like that method. The difficulty that a lot of people run into is trying to get that low seeding rate. So sometimes people will mix it like with pelletized lime or some fertilizer so that they can get the low rate of crabgrass. We do have several producers that will go ahead and no-till drill it, and as long as they can keep the depth shallow enough, they have very good success with that as well. Depending on how much residue is in the pasture whenever you're broadcasting, I might recommend going behind and dragging or doing some kind of cultipacking or running the cows really heavy through it. Something, again, just to make sure you're getting good seed to soil contact.
Comment on that is the fling with broadcasting, without it being coated, it doesn't fling very well. So coated seed will fling much better.
You can only drill the mojo, right? I mean, you can't drill it if it's not.
Yeah, the coating definitely helps with the drilling. And somebody else had a question to comment too?
Yeah, I did. It was just, I just saw it, but the earliest time possibly even broadcasted a plant